So I'm curious. Some discussions here and there throughout the day brings me to the whole concept of forgiveness. Why does it seem, and let me preface this entire thing by saying I realize I'm not covering any new ground here. There's been plenty of people to address this subject. But not everyone has seen or appreciated the argument, I guess, because it keeps coming up. So I'm going to throw my 2 cents worth in, and it's probably worth about exactly 2 cents. And I'm good with that. That's fine. But I'm still going to ask the question. What is God's problem? Seriously, what's God's problem? Why is it that God, throughout the Old Testament, required blood sacrifice? He wanted blood. He created not only man, but all of the creatures of the earth, supposedly, allegedly. And he turns around and demands that they be slaughtered to appease him. The burning flesh of sacrifices are a pleasant odor to God. That doesn't that strike anyone as a little bit twisted? Okay, and okay, granted, you can say that was the Old Testament. Sacrifices are no longer required. But why are sacrifices no longer required? Because in the Old Testament, there's a couple of human sacrifices, but the majority of it is animal sacrifices. But then it seemed like he moved up a step to get to the New Testament. Human sacrifices, few and far between in the Old. Animal sacrifices, the prevalent thing. Now, I understand there's basically 2 different camps within Christianity. One that considers Jesus is God, and one that considers Jesus as merely, I guess, a messenger, the appointed one, the anointed one, the Messiah, but short of being divine himself. He had to be sacrificed in order for God to forgive people for their sins. That doesn't make any sense to me. If this God is all-powerful and all-loving and all-good, why require any sacrifice? Because some of these very self-same Christians who will talk about how Jesus sacrificed himself in order to give God the ability to forgive us and give us a chance for redemption are the same people who will talk out against animal cruelty, who will talk about abuse of children as a bad thing. All of these ideas are totally contradictory. God cannot, in one breath, demand a blood sacrifice from us, and in the next breath, claim that he is all good. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, if you've got some sort of framework to put this in, well, 2 things come to mind. One, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Can you make a logical argument for this stance? And 2, if you can't make a logical argument, then you're going to have to fall back on faith. But beyond that, you're going to have to fall back on the argument that we are all God's creation. Shouldn't he be allowed to do as he pleases with it? Let's take that logical step further. If that's your response, that we are all God's creation, he should be allowed to do as he sees fit with us. Well, 2 humans getting together and copulating creates a child. So by your logic, abortion should be okay. Because, after all, it's our creation. We created it. We should have the power to end it if we so desire. I mean, that's essentially the argument you're making. And I understand. You can go on to say that, well, it's a different thing entirely, because all life is created by God, so only God has that authority. But to say that is, it's kind of disturbing in and of itself, really, because you're not really addressing the question. You're passing the buck. You're avoiding the question. Saying that God is the source of all life, and therefore he has the ultimate authority to do whatever he wants with all life, says that there is, in fact, a quantifiable measurement of who has authority. And we're going to go back to God as the ultimate authority. But by extension, that same logic would apply to everyone else who's ever created something. And, okay, let's not talk about life for a second. Let's talk about gene manipulation. The scientists who create the process to manipulate genes to create the perfect person, if you will, that's not creating life, but it is their process, it is their creation. Shouldn't they have ultimate control over it? Or should there be some sort of ethical consideration put into place? And if there is no ethical consideration for either humans in that circumstance or God himself, then where does this supposed absolute morality come from? Because you see, in order for God to be the source of absolute morality, he has to embody that absolute morality. And yet he does things that we would absolutely consider immoral, like demanding blood sacrifices. And if this same God who demands blood sacrifices is the source of absolute morality, then by learning from example, blood sacrifices are absolutely moral. It's mind-boggling, really, to me. Maybe some of you have answers that I'm not privy to. And I'm curious what those are. That's all. Have a good night.